Hello and welcome to another episode of The Food Fighters, the podcast fighting an apparent desire to significantly lower our food standards, eliminate British farming as we know it, and allow huge commercialisation of the food production industry here in the UK. This would have disastrous consequences not just for our diets but for our daily lives too. My name's Nick Webb and I'm joined once again by Liz Webster, who's the founder of Save British Farming, and also Oli Fletcher, who as well as being integral to SPF is also a farmer and rural historian. It's been a very eventful week for all sorts of reasons, but I think today we're going to start with some polling by Politico, which essentially shows that the government's agri-food deal agreed in principle with Brussels seems to be sort of universally popular with both Leavers and Remainers. Liz, do you want to just tell me what you think, what this agri-food deal will do and why, essentially, people seem to understand that it's quite, essentially a good idea, if not as good as what we had when we were in the EU?
Yeah, look, the SPS agreement, of course, is absolutely great because it gets rid of the frictions between us and our biggest market. And that can only help the economy and help the supply chains, which business is really, really struggling with.
Mm-hmm.
And it would also ease the situation for Northern Ireland. But there's a big but here. To actually implement the SPS agreement is very, very, very difficult because we know this because Switzerland did one and it took them 10 years to implement it.
Mm-hmm.
And this government is saying that they can get it done in a year. The situation for us compared to Switzerland is much more complicated because Switzerland only has 2 land borders with the EU. We've obviously got several different ports where goods come in from other areas. And by far, the best solution for the problems we've got is rejoining the single market and the customs union.
Yes.
And that was pointed out by John Springfield in The Guardian this week. And he is talking for all the biggest businesses that rely on trade.
Mm-hmm.
And so from my perspective, I can say, yes, an SPS agreement would be brilliant. It's a lot better than what we've got now. But why not just go to the easy solution, which would be able to get, we would be able to get that in pretty quickly if we were to rejoin the customs union and the single market in some way. That would be quicker than doing an SPS agreement.
Yes, well, and the other thing is, I suppose we get this, it's just another one of those things where we sort of edge towards what we had, but without lots and lots of the other benefits. So if you rejoin the single market, we have freedom of movement, we have all of these things that we seem to be heading towards, and we're just sort of edging towards it bit by bit. And yeah, as you say, John Springford was talking this week, wasn't he, and basically said what everyone has been saying, rejoin the customs union and the single market, and all of this stuff goes away. So it's very interesting to see how long this is going to go on for without us trying to raise that issue with a serious politician, saying we need to solve these problems, and there is this answer just staring us in the face. Surely
the poll shows us that nothing has changed since 2016, because when people have been continuously polled about food standards, they back high food standards. And so with 60, whatever it was in the polls, 60 odd % wanting to do the SPS agreement, 22% don't know. When you take out the don't knows, and there's only 22% that actually want to have lower food standards and diverge from EU regulations, that there's an overwhelming majority for joining the single market and the customs union. And when these new EES checks come in next week, that number is going to go higher because it's going to get immeasurably more difficult to travel to Europe.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely going to be one of those situations where sadly people have been trying to shout from the rooftops, but it's only going to really kick in when it happens to people and they experience the negative effects of this stuff. And then rather than listening to experts who are saying if these EES checks come in, your holiday will be infinitely more complicated and delays and all of the stuff that you don't want, and then people will start complaining and whinging about it probably only when it happens to them, which is sad really. Oli, as we're talking food standards here with all this SPS stuff, how much do you think it's going to be a big issue for the farming community if we don't have this situation sorted out. Imports, exports wise, this SPS stuff is vital, isn't it?
Well, there's a few different things that could happen. I can't tell the future, unfortunately. If we don't align with European food standards, we open ourselves up to be undercut by substandard food. Obviously, British farmers are subject to a great deal of regulation, from animal welfare to environmental and sanitary regulations, all sorts of things. And that's how we have to operate. We don't have a choice in that. So competing with Europe is fairly easy because they essentially operate along similar lines to us. But if we don't align our food standards with those productive standards, then we're having to compete with people who are not on a fair playing field with us. They have less regulations to deal with. They also often have economies of scale or state support for farming, which we don't have anymore. So we would not be able to compete. So I think from a productive perspective, it is absolutely crucial that we align our food standards with Europe. But there are a couple of disadvantages in that genetically modified crops, for example, do have some benefits, but those wouldn't be allowed in Europe. So we would be foregoing some potential productive advantages in order to survive, which I think is a reasonable trade, if not an ideal one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think, it comes back to the point that we are much more physically closer to Europe and the EU. So trading and being able to trade easily with our closest trading partners surely makes sense. And once again, people don't want lower standard food, do they? And that essentially is what all this stuff will bring in if we veer towards the American model. It just means we're putting lower quality food on our shelves and in our bodies, which nobody wants. I mean, I've been talking to more and more people about what we're doing, and I haven't had anybody yet kick back and go, no, actually, I want lower standard food that costs less, that isn't as good for me. And people genuinely, when I explain to them about British farming, they're like, yeah, I would like to eat locally sourced food made by British farmers. It seems to be quite popular.
It doesn't cost less. You pay more for lower standard food, and that's always been the case. But with Brexit, they lied. They lied on steroids, and they said food was going to be cheaper, footwear, all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
Inflation, it's gone through the roof because of Brexit, because of the trade barriers, and they have done deals allowing in substandard food here, but it's not cheaper than British food was and still is. They can make British food cheaper by subsidizing British food production more, and there's nothing wrong in doing that because food is a staple. Everybody needs it to survive. So food subsidies are across the board, across the world. All countries subsidize food production in one way or another, apart from the UK and Brexit. You couldn't make it up. But if they'd actually looked and asked the real questions with Brexit and been truthful, if Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson had stood up, vote for Brexit, immigration will go up by 4 times. We'll leave the Dublin Accord, and that means that we'll lose all control of asylum seekers and we'll be a beacon because they'll know that we'll lose the agreements with the European stations.
Yeah.
And also food will be lower standard and you'll pay more for it. Those statements I've just said are the truth, and Brexit has proved itself. But a lot of people do not want to admit that they've been conned, and so they don't want to talk about Brexit. And it is one of these massive problems that we've got. Brexit's been done, and so you should just live with it. I mean, Brexit is not finished, and they're still trying to get...
Brexit is ongoing.
They're still trying to do Brexit 2, which is leaving the ECHR. So while we're talking about SPS, to keep you all quiet, they are pushing the ECHR, and the person within the Labour Party doing that is Maurice Glassman.
Ooh.
Well, I mean...
Morgan McSweeney.
And Brexit isn't done. I mean, I've been banging on about this for a while, but the TCA, we can't implement it because we don't have the border force, we don't have the infrastructure, and we have a wide open border because we're letting everything flow through at the moment. And this is the other thing with this SPS stuff, is that what hasn't been mentioned, and I don't actually know what the thinking is here, but if we do have this new SPS agreement, are we going to be under ECJ oversight? Because if you then aren't part of the ECJ, if you don't have the ECJ able to prosecute people who sell dodgy meat, like the horse meat scandal, then what's the point? Because we're still a smuggler's paradise if we don't have ECJ oversight.
Well, what you're seeing, Nick, is that Britain is acting in bad faith. That's what I'm trying to explain. The rhetoric is not matching with their actions.
No.
And they do want to go on to, there's a big body of power in Britain that want to go on and do Brexit too, which is chaos of leaving the ECHR, chaos in Ireland, potentially the return of the Troubles, which, I mean, you two are younger than me. I lived through the Troubles, and that would be horrendous. But that is what they want to do, and the fight now is between those two realities, and the people that want Brexit too don't really respect democracy. They just actually work to con voters, and that's
well, it seems to be for the benefit of them and a very small proportion of the population who will get incredibly rich incredibly quickly and then probably most likely disappear. The case for all this stuff is out there in the open as well. It's not like this is a secret that people are sort of hiding the fact they want to leave the ECHR now. It's in the press. People are saying it. And it's scary times. It's worrying. And it seems to be that we are edging closer and closer to it. So fingers crossed we can get some sensible politicians to stand up about it. And talking of politicians standing up to things, Hugh Grant gave a very interesting interview this week about, the role of the press and the role of the Labour Party, who said that they would, do things and represent people who have had, for example, their phones hacked and all this sort of stuff. But the closer it came to election time, Starmer cozied up to your Rupert Murdochs and started writing articles in The Sun and stuff. How disappointing is it that we have a Labour Party who it's another example of them kind of doing the opposite of what everyone was hoping. They said in opposition, as Hugh Grant quite rightly pointed out, we've got your back. We're going to take on the press. We're not going to let this stuff go on anymore. And now it seems to be that they're doing the opposite and terrified of upsetting Rupert Murdoch and others because they're so worried of what, if you cross these people, what will happen to you in the press.
Yes, well, we've got as you know, in the last week with the Labour conference, Andy Burnham is here waiting in the wings, but he's blocked from getting into Westminster because Glassman and McSweeney, who control Starmer, have control of the NEC, and they also have the media on their side. In my view, the Labour Party, the Labour government does not have the values of the Labour Party. They have the values of the far right agenda, which is this disaster of attaching ourselves to the American sort of Trump model, which is becoming more authoritarian by the day. And so really the race is on for that. Who wins this race? And how does that small clique within the Labour Party, because they are small, but they've got considerable power by controlling the levers, will they survive, or will the body of pro-social democracy MPs in the Labour Party take back control? And Oli, that's something you've been looking at anyway with McSweeney and Glassman.
Yeah, so essentially what has happened, I think, is that there's been this faction in the Labour Party since Gordon Brown's defeat, or at least it was prominent since Gordon Brown's electoral defeat, called Blue Labour, which was founded by a chap called Maurice Glassman, who was an academic, and seems to have very strong links to Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's chief of staff, who seems to control everything, and also the new Home Secretary, which is very, very important because it shows how powerful they are, in that they have been characterising Farage as the main enemy to whom the workers will flock from the outset as soon as Labour won the election, and in doing so forced Starmer to go right, which is really, really not working for him. But then because it's not working, they're saying, well, you have to be even more extreme. You have to have a reshuffle, reset the government, put our people in, and it continues. And now you have them, coming out after parroting Farage, getting all of the cabinet ministers to wave flags and talk about the St George's Cross decor they have in their living rooms, which I don't believe for a moment. They chase Farage. He gets more and more extreme. He comes out and says we'll scrap indefinite leave to remain, and then they call it racist and patronise the supporters anyway. So the whole thing is a bit of a bin fire. But I think that's the point. I think Starmer is being bullied by these people, essentially, because they want a reindustrialised, remilitarised country with a reconstructed working class, and they want Britain to dominate Europe by force, essentially, under some sort of all-powerful individual who will lead these working class people. I've done a video about it on my channel, but as such, it's a very, very strange position, because it's not the position that sort of middle class, socially progressive, neoliberal leaning people in the Labour Party hold, nor is it a traditionally socialist perspective. It's sort of a new perspective, although Glasman would disagree with that, that he considers to be aligned with what he calls the left wing of MAGA Square. He thinks it's very similar to the perspective of J.D. Vance and Steve Bannon, who he thinks are interested in, closing up the borders to America, as he calls it, capitalism in one country, in the Stalinist sense, where you have American capital invested in America for the benefit of American workers, and that's what he wants to see in Britain.
Yes, I mean, there is this whole copying, and probably, it seems to be that a lot of the people that are behind Farage are probably the same sort of people who are behind Trump, from what I can work out. But again, it just does seem to be copying this MAGA Trump model, and going down the route of essentially copying where America is. But I think it's interesting what you say about bullying Starmer, because that does make sense, because everything that you look at with Starmer's past and his political views, he doesn't seem to be taking those views as Prime Minister. And it's very, as I've said before, it's very disappointing when you did, fingers crossed, maybe foolishly, that Starmer would come in and start to do some of the things that you might hope, and he's done the opposite. So what does it mean for Andy Burnham then? Because how much power, if what you're saying is accurate and these guys do have this much power, what does it mean for the Labour Party, the traditional Labour Party? And why isn't anybody making more of a noise about this and saying, hold on a minute, hold on, guys, who are these guys who are trying to take control of the party? Why is the information not coming out from the other side of Labour to let the public know that this is happening and try and save the party, essentially?
That's because we haven't had part 2 of Leveson, and that's why you're not hearing about it, because the media have got tight control of the narrative. I'm
talking about Labour politicians here, guys who do have a platform and a voice. Why are they not coming out and saying this? Because surely it's big news.
Well, some of them have, and I'm sure you'll see more, but they're conscious of the fact that a split in the party is hugely problematic. And they have to challenge the Prime Minister at the right time. And there's also the propensity for, and it happened in 1931 under Ramsay MacDonald, there is a possibility of the Labour Party splitting and the Labour government, as it is, forming a coalition with other partners to keep the government going. And that happened in 1931, that Ramsay MacDonald was very right wing and he got into a coalition with the Conservatives. So these things are delicate, and the amount of power that they've got within the party, because they've worked hard since Starmer took control to literally expel all of the moderates from the sort of levers of power within the party itself. So it is a really scary situation, in my view.
Yeah, it sounds quite similar to what Johnson did, when he just expelled all of the people who didn't support his Brexit ideas, really, and it just destroyed the Conservative Party. And if that is happening to Labour, then I just hope that what I would call the normal Labour Party politicians come out and do something about it, because they'd have the public support, and again, it would probably give them the opportunity to seize this centre-left ground that we keep talking about on the pod.
Yeah, I think there is a strong comparison to be drawn between Dominic Cummings and Glasman and McSweeney, because in Glasman and McSweeney's view, they have a vision. They want to reindustrialise, remilitarise, have vocational training in the army to reconstruct a working class, close down universities. They want to abolish the Treasury and invest the powers in the Prime Minister. But the problem is that step one of their plan is to destroy everything. They have to do away with the rule of law, which they think MAGA is a good model for. You rile up the working class and make them angry. They destroy everything. They sort of crown a charismatic leader. And then after that, after you've ridded yourself of the protections of the European Union and the ECHR and the World Health Organization and such, you can then rebuild what you want, right? But the problem is that they're probably not going to get the chance to do that because they will lose the next election and give it to Farage because they've just riled everybody up, and he will benefit from that, which is the same essentially as what Dominic Cummings did. Dominic Cummings had a vision, but step one of the vision was leave Europe, destroy everything, and then he'll rebuild it. But he didn't get a chance to rebuild it because what he did ripped the Conservative Party apart and then annoyed the country to the extent that they were not going to win the next election. And that is exactly what I think McSweeney is doing.
But isn't that just essentially what reform would do anyway? Isn't Farage saying very similar things? And
nearly. Glasman and Farage get on, clearly, and they do have similarities. But he describes Farage as a saloon bar Thatcherite, as in Farage, very free market, pro-Russia. Glasman disagrees with him on that. But Glasman's vision is socialist in a sense. It's a particular type of socialism, not one that I would recognise, I don't think. But he wants lots of state control of industry. He wants an industrial plan. He wants a military plan. This is all stuff that Farage doesn't sit naturally with. I know Farage is talking about renationalising steel and such now, but they do have different visions for what you do after you've destroyed the post-war rules-based order. At the moment, they're aligned. They both want to.
They're consistent on that, though, aren't they? They want to, like you said, they want to destroy everything and then rebuild something from the embers.
Well, I don't know if Farage wants to rebuild anything, but Glasman does.
That's a good point. Yeah. Well, scary times, Liz.
I just see it as a relay race. The Brexit project, has probably gone on for decades, in that the war between democracy and social democracy and feudalism has raged for centuries, and really the elite want to have control of everything, and they just think that to protect their eliteness is all that matters. It's an oligarchy. Feudalism is an oligarchy, and that's why some of them, like Farage, admire Putin as a leader. That's what they want. And even the elite in Russia don't actually really want to live in Russia. They want to be in Europe. I mean, you couldn't make it up. So it is an extraordinary reality. It's greed. I mean, it's greed for wealth and power, and greed knows no boundaries. Certainly, in certain people that have a psychological tendency to want to control, and people that are more left wing tend to be more empathetic and able to see things across the board, to understand that you need social cohesion. I was once in Good Morning Britain's green room with John Fashanu, the footballer from the 1980s, and he's moved to Nigeria. And I asked him, I just said, well, how do you find that? Because, and he sort of said, oh, well, he said, it's marvelous. I love it there. He said, I can tell you now, Nigeria is the place where you feel rich because you can afford everything that you want, all the staff, all the security. He said, in Britain, there's no way that you can feel really rich, but in Nigeria you can. And then I'd never really considered that before. And so if you've got that kind of approach, if you think like that you don't care about what's happening to everybody else around you, and that only your life matters, then this is why we end up in this mess. And this is why we have a democracy, to make sure that decisions are made across the board rather than by one or two people that perhaps have psychopathic or narcissistic tendencies.
Yes, and it's just such a shame that we don't seem to have anybody representing correctly people who maybe don't think like that, this centre left ground that we keep talking about. So yeah, I mean, it's very, very scary, and these are particularly sort of worrying times, because we're now teetering towards carrying on this Brexit project, and like you say, the ECHR stuff, and going down this dangerous route that we seem to be headed down. So yes, worrying times. And, we did touch upon there, Farage's, he has been on the record as saying he's quite a big fan of Putin. And there's been something that has been bubbling under for years, really. And this links of certain politicians and the whole Brexit project to Russia and Russian interference. And it was a couple of weeks ago now, but, Nathan Gill did plead guilty to 8 counts of bribery on the 26th of September. And he also, I think, there's one other charge that he didn't plead guilty to. That it sounds like there was a plea bargain where they've probably said to him that if you plead guilty to the 8, we'll leave you on the 9th. The 9th, it evades me what it was. Oh, he denied one charge, conspiracy to commit bribery. But this is murky stuff. And if Gill is pleaded guilty, how many others do we think are probably involved?
Nathan Gill was very much a protege of Nigel Farage. They were really, really close. And he was appointed as head of the Welsh Brexit Party, and he was in the Reform Party as well. But there's been really little coverage of it in Britain. America's press have covered it, and obviously the European press have covered it in detail. But here it's just sort of like, oh, never mind, this happened, and they want to get rid of it. We'll have to wait and see what happens, but it's really important that people keep sharing this information about what has gone on and ask really important questions, because some people say that that Nigel Farage does whatever he does for money. Whatever he does is he's motivated by money.
Yes.
So if Nathan Gill took money to give Russian messages in the European Parliament, well, certainly, but the reason we think that Nigel Farage is pro-Russia is because of his representations in the European Parliament, where he was talking about not provoking the Russian bear. So are we to believe that Nigel did that for free? And maybe there are some connections. There should be some more questions asked, and that is what our authorities should be looking into. And there's a lot of problems with the funding of the Reform Party itself, which people like Mr. Essicle are working on and reporting to the authorities. But again, at the moment, there's just I don't know. There seems to be some sort of bung on this, and it isn't discussed. And Farage is given a clean slate to do whatever he wants and continue doing whatever he says he wants to do. And I think the other thing that really spoke volumes to me was the fact that Morgan McSweeney sat next to Rupert Murdoch in the state banquet.
Yeah.
And all of these people are on the same side, I think, even though we see Labour and the Conservatives and the Reform Party as different vehicles. I just actually see there's certain people within those parties are all connected to the same project.
Yes, and there's certainly an element of it that reminds me of the wonderful book Dark Money. I can't remember who wrote it now, but there seems to be this secret funding. These people who are incredibly powerful, and it comes from America. There definitely does seem to be this link, and the fact that you have a political party like Reform who don't just say, no, we're not going to tell you who backs us. They actually get angry, and they sort of act offended that people want to know where their funding comes from. And it's it just stinks, really. And Farage used to go on Russia Today. This is all stuff that's been recorded. You can go and find it on YouTube. This is not secret. But I just don't know where it ends. What would it mean?
And Russia, people forget Russia has actually twice perpetrated serious crimes. I mean, really, the Novichok reality is so shocking. And then also Litvinenko's poisoning. And these acts are acts of, they're beyond terrorism, really. They are, in my view, an act of war on a country when you go in and attack another country's citizens in that way and kill them. And I find it amazing that anybody can sit comfortably with a politician in this country hoping to be prime minister who is supportive of Russia and Putinism. That's scary.
And could be influenced by him to do things that are pro-Russia and anti-Britain. That's the really worrying thing, isn't it? I mean, Oli, when you think about all this stuff, even if Farage was hauled over the coals and something that people are alleging he gets found guilty of, What do you think happens? Because you can't really reverse all of the Brexit and stuff like that that could have potentially had Russian interference. I mean, where do you see this going? If we could uncover this stuff, what would it mean for our politics?
Well, I think such things are best prevented, aren't they, rather than fixed retroactively. I think all of this, we sort of suffer from a form of exceptionalism in England, at least, in which we sort of think, oh, it can't happen here. So in Europe, Farage is seen as part of a broader swing to the right that is happening in lots of European countries at the moment, and we know about Le Pen and the AfD in Germany and such things, and Farage is seen as part of this within Europe, but we sort of say, oh, he's not like them, is he? He's English. He's one of us. He's not that bad. It can't be that bad. It doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen here. And this obviously goes back a long time to our experience in the war. Again, there was lots of bad people in Britain in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and thereafter. It just doesn't really go away. But we sort of tell ourselves a story in Britain that it doesn't really happen here. We don't have these sort of international links. We're just sort of quite insular because we live on an island, and he's English, isn't he? He's English. So we have a psychological barrier, I think, to actually thinking critically about these things in a way that some countries don't.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and the other thing comes back to what we were touching on earlier. It is the press. If you have a press, and I work in the media, and I'm not suggesting for a second that every single journalist that works for the Sun or the Mail or they're not awful people individually, but we seem to have a press here that is totally dominated by people who seem to support the right wing at the moment. So, if Farage was doing what he was doing, but it wasn't Farage, it was Dawn Butler, or it was a politician who they didn't align with, they would be absolutely hauling these guys over the coals. But because it's the people that they are propping up and supporting, the press won't go after them. And that is really, really worrying. And it does make you wonder quite how dominant, these people are behind the scenes as well. How much pressure gets put on politicians like Starmer in private? Do they get threatened? Do they have newspaper, owners essentially saying to them, if you don't toe the line here, we are going to bring out some nasty stuff on you? I mean, I know stories just within the media of celebrities, big celebrities, who I have heard from people who are pretty well placed, that they sort of drag out celebrities in the press over a long period because they have a big story on them. And they say, if you don't give us something, we're going to bring out this big story on you. And eventually these celebrities almost run out of stories to feed the tabloid press. And then, the big story then comes out after years. And it's really, really disturbing the way that the press can get to individuals. And if they do it to celebrities, it makes sense to me that they are able to do it to politicians as well.
So we're going to end where we began and recognise that Leveson 2 is so important, and it's been blocked, and it was blocked by the Conservatives. And as Hugh Grant pointed out, they thought, wow, and they helped get the Labour government in, Hacked Off did, and now they've been totally and utterly betrayed, as we as farmers have been betrayed as well. And so he was asked actually in the interview, do you want to stand as a politician and get elected? And he said he fantasizes about it, but his friends say that he's unelectable. Well, I would absolutely get behind Hugh Grant as Prime Minister.
I agree.
Because he's got the right, he understands what government is meant to be there for, which is actually to control the corporations, to ensure that the country is balanced.
And he understands the media and how the media works. He'll speak out against the media, as he has been doing. And I think, in the same way that Trump and Farage, but Trump learned a lot of his communication skills on shows like The Apprentice. Politics now is, you have to be so much more media savvy. And if you understand how the media works, I think it's a hugely important tool in your arsenal. And Trump is obviously, to give him and Farage their credit, it's the only credit I can give them. They're brilliantly effective communicators. They know how to take the centre stage in the media, and they know how to get a message across. And I think somebody like Hugh Grant, who has the right ideas about government, but also fundamentally knows how the media work, I think it's vital. And I think that these people, if not at the front, they should be involved in advising and, maybe behind the scenes in government.
It's extraordinary that the Rupert Murdoch's paper hacked a dead girl's phone.
Yeah, I know
to
people
get
who have had
information.
payments from
And
phone hacking trials. I mean,
and
it's awful.
so it's not just the media being errant. This is rampant criminality.
And this is just the
Uh,
stuff they've been caught for, don't forget. This is only
yeah.
the we only hear about the stuff that's actually
And
out in the public domain.
the court cases are still going on.
Yeah,
Prince
yeah.
Harry has got a hearing starting in the new year with other politicians, and Simon Hughes is alongside him. So, and what these big news corporations are doing is they're just paying out a
Yep.
fortune
I know
in the
people who
courts
have
and
been paid.
silencing it.
Yeah, because they don't want it coming to trial. So they give quite big payouts to people of who I know, who
So they're
just
happy to
receive these
throw
payouts to shut it to shut it down, basically.
They're happy to throw people under the bus for, I mean, Angela Rayner's in the frame at the moment. They're happy to throw her under the bus for really something quite small,
Yeah,
and yet they
exactly.
go large and
Front
spend
page.
billions to protect their own reputation. So why would you believe The Sun? Why would you
Mhm.
believe what that organization is saying? I mean, by all means, read it, but just think
Yes.
about, oh, why are they saying this to
Yes.
me? That is how I look at the news. I look at it critically instead of believing what is in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely. Why are they telling me this? What's the motivation for it? But yes, I mean, it is absolutely fundamental that we have a free press, obviously. But how the press use that freedom, I think we have discovered over the years. As in every institution, you have bad operators and bad actors. I think yes.
Well, famously, Murdoch said that he didn't like the European Parliament because when he goes into Westminster, they all stand up, and when he goes to the European Parliament, they ignore him.
A man with an ego that needs massaging by the sound of it. Okay, great. As ever, it's a very busy week. Lots going on. We will, of course, be back soon. Watch us on socials. We're now up on YouTube. We're trying to get ourselves across best we can everywhere we can. But yeah, like, support, share, get the message out there. Oli, Liz, as ever, thank you very much.
Thank you. See you soon. See
And
you next
we
week.
see you all very, very soon. Thank you.